In Hollywood, where dreams come true or shatter, some stories aren't written in the stars. They're written in blood. This one begins with a beautiful woman, a man who loved her too much, and a twisted tale of betrayal that will leave you questioning just how far some will go to get everything they desire. But what happens when a dream turns deadly? In December 1988, a chilling plot was set in motion, one that no scriptwriter could have imagined. Marry Ellen Gernick, a woman who looked like the embodiment of everything people aspire to: beauty, charm, and elegance. But underneath that facade lay a heart cold enough to shatter lives. And behind the man she left in her wake? Bob Samuelson, an ordinary man with an extraordinary love for a woman who would destroy him. Bob Samuelson had always been an unremarkable figure in the bustling world of Hollywood. A cinematographer by profession, he worked tirelessly behind the scenes, making movies come to life with his camera lens. He was loved for his easygoing nature, admired by his peers and famous stars alike. But his personal life? Well, that's where the story takes a dark twist. In the glitzy world of Hollywood, where dreams are built on the silver screen, Bob's life had been a series of ordinary struggles. Long work hours, unpredictable schedules, and constant travel kept him away from his wife, Mary Ellen. A marriage that once seemed full of promise was crumbling before his eyes, and yet, he couldn't see it. He loved her deeply, despite the signs that pointed to a slow unraveling of their bond. But Mary Ellen? She had bigger dreams. Dreams that no longer included Bob. She had once been the girl next door that Bob had fallen in love with back in high school. But now, she was desperate for the kind of life that could never be achieved through hard work. No, Mary Ellen wanted a shortcut. She wanted fame, luxury, and a life free of the mundane. At first, Bob couldn't see the darkness creeping into their relationship. They had their share of problems, like any couple, but he always believed that things would get better. He just didn't realize how far gone Mary Ellen really was. Mary Ellen had been chasing a dream for years. After high school, she dabbled in a few small ads and tried to get her foot in the door of Hollywood, but success eluded her. So, she married Bob, seeking comfort in a man who could offer her stability. But, as time wore on, she became disillusioned with the life she had built. The glamorous world she'd once dreamed of had slipped through her fingers, and now she was stuck in a reality she didn't want to accept. Desperation settled in. The life she dreamed of had never materialized, and as Bob worked long hours on movie sets, Mary Ellen found herself bored and unfulfilled. She longed for the excitement that Hollywood promised, but she had no idea how to make it her own. By 1986, Bob and Mary Ellen had already hit a breaking point. Their relationship had been on and off, with plenty of arguments and fights. Bob tried everything to fix their marriage, even buying a sandwich shop for Mary Ellen to manage. But the idea of selling sandwiches in the San Fernando Valley didn't exactly inspire her. It was clear that no amount of money or material things could fill the emptiness she felt inside. Then came the turning point. Mary Ellen made a choice. She wasn't going to live in the shadow of a man who had everything she wanted. She needed to find a way to secure her future, and she was willing to do whatever it took. Bob Samuelson had no idea what his wife was plotting behind closed doors. The love she had once shown him had turned into a means to an end. By 1988, Mary Ellen had her sights set on something far more sinister. She knew Bob was ready to end their marriage, and for her, that was the perfect opportunity. She could either go through a messy divorce, losing everything she'd come to rely on, or she could take the more dramatic route, turning her husband into the villain and finding a way to make him disappear. In a twist that feels like something out of a film, Mary Ellen found a man who could help her with her darkest desire, Jimmy Bernstein. A small-time drug dealer with a thirst for fame and a warped sense of loyalty, Jimmy became her pawn. What started as an innocent flirtation quickly spiraled into something much darker. Mary Ellen planted the seeds of hatred for Bob in Jimmy's mind, portraying him as an abusive, manipulative man. The more Jimmy learned about Bob, the angrier he became. Mary Ellen convinced him that Bob had abused her daughter, Nicole, and now, it was time to make him pay. With her persuasion, Jimmy agreed to do the unthinkable, kill Bob Samuelson. As Christmas approached, the plan was set in motion. Bob had no idea that the woman he loved had already decided his fate. When he returned home from work on December 7, 1988, he stepped into a nightmare. He had no idea that this would be the last day of his life. Bob's last moments were not filled with the peace he had hoped for. Instead, they were filled with the shocking violence that had been carefully orchestrated by his wife and her accomplices. As Bob stepped out of the shower, he was attacked from behind. A blow to the head knocked him unconscious, and before he could understand what was happening, the life was stolen from him. The details of the crime are chilling. Bob's body was left in the hallway for 2 days, with his wife playing the part of the grieving widow, calling his phone in an attempt to cover her tracks. But it didn't take long for the police to realize that something was amiss. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. As the days passed, the police slowly began to piece together the shocking puzzle of Bob Samuelson's death. The grieving widow, Mary Ellen, had given her story, a tale of a robbery gone wrong, but detectives had already started questioning the narrative she had so carefully crafted. There was one glaring problem: everything about the crime scene felt staged. And when the pieces of the puzzle didn't add up, the detective's suspicion turned toward the one person who stood to gain the most, Mary Ellen. When the police arrived at Bob's home, they were confronted with a scene that seemed almost too neatly orchestrated. The supposed break-in was anything but convincing. Mary Ellen had done her best to create the illusion of a robbery gone awry. Drawers were pulled out, furniture was upturned, and a hammer had been used to pry open the front door. Yet something didn't sit right with the officers. The scene felt more like an amateur attempt to cover up a carefully planned murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence of foul play, the police had no concrete proof to tie Mary Ellen to the crime. All they had were suspicions in a house that was starting to feel like a set from one of the crime dramas Bob had worked on. But what really struck the officers as strange was how calm and collected Mary Ellen seemed. While she played the role of the heartbroken widow, it was becoming clear that her grief didn't match the reality of the situation. In her police interviews, Mary Ellen kept repeating the same line, "I can't get a hold of my husband." As if that was enough to explain everything. She seemed more interested in making sure the police didn't suspect her than in mourning the loss of her husband. But the officers weren't buying it. The whole thing reeked of a carefully rehearsed performance. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of lies woven by Mary Ellen and her daughter, Nicole. They found a disturbing pattern of manipulation and deceit, all pointing back to the woman who had once been Bob's high school sweetheart. But now, she was no longer the innocent girl he had once dreamed of marrying. Now, she was someone who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Nicole, the 16-year-old daughter, had also played a crucial part in this twisted story. She had been the one to recruit Jimmy Bernstein, the young man who would carry out the murder. But Nicole's involvement wasn't just limited to manipulation. She had been used by her mother, just as her mother had used Bob. Mary Ellen had groomed her own daughter, teaching her how to seduce men and use them for her own gain. Nicole, too young to fully understand the consequences, was swept up in the madness, and before long, she had become her mother's accomplice in a crime that would shake their family to its core. Meanwhile, Jimmy Bernstein, who had been led to believe that he was protecting the woman he loved, began to unravel. Guilt weighed heavily on him as he realized he had been nothing more than a pawn in Mary Ellen's game. But by then, it was too late. His emotions began to get the better of him, and the plans he had so carefully followed started to crack. Jimmy's mental state spiraled, and the lies he had been fed began to eat away at him. The investigation into Bob's murder had been a slow burn, but things were about to take a turn. Jimmy, now fully aware of the extent of his involvement, began to crack under the pressure. He had always been a loner, never really part of any social circles, but his growing guilt made him feel like a prisoner in his own mind. And now, as Mary Ellen celebrated her newfound wealth, Jimmy couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. As the investigation into Bob's murder took unexpected turns, Mary Ellen's life seemed to take a different direction. It seemed as though she had gotten away with the perfect crime. She collected her insurance payout, moved into Bob's house, and even bought herself a brand new Porsche, enjoying the life she had always dreamed of. But just as she was celebrating her freedom, something much darker loomed on the horizon. Before we continue, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Mary Ellen had always prided herself on being a master of control. Her beauty, her cunning, and her ability to manipulate people around her made her a force to be reckoned with. As she basked in the comforts of her new life, thanks to the blood money from her husband's death, she had no idea how close the truth was to coming to light. In the weeks following Bob's murder, Mary Ellen kept up appearances. She threw lavish parties, went on shopping sprees, and enjoyed the high life she had always dreamed of. But behind the facade, the guilt gnawed at her. The woman who had once been an actress in the shadows of Hollywood now lived in the center of her own carefully orchestrated drama. Yet as she relished in her spoils, the haunting truth that she had orchestrated a murder slowly began to close in on her. While Mary Ellen was celebrating her apparent victory, her accomplice, Jimmy Bernstein, was unraveling. His guilt became unbearable. The reality of what he had done, what he had been manipulated into doing, was too much for him to ignore. He couldn't escape the image of Bob Samuelson's lifeless body, nor the fact that he had been used by the woman he thought he loved. But it wasn't just the guilt that was breaking him down, it was the realization that Mary Ellen had deceived him in ways he couldn't even comprehend. She had played him, just as she had played so many others in her life. She had convinced him that Bob was the villain, the abusive father, the man who had ruined her life, when in reality, Bob had been nothing but a pawn in her quest for power and wealth. Driven by guilt, Jimmy finally decided he couldn't live with what he had done any longer. He made the difficult choice to turn himself into the police, hoping that by doing so, he could find some peace. It wasn't just his conscience that was eating away at him, it was also the knowledge that Mary Ellen had been manipulating him for so long, using her daughter Nicole to further her own twisted agenda. But before Jimmy could take any action, he was approached by someone who would change the course of events entirely. Paul Gall, one of the other hitmen involved in the plan, was also beginning to feel the weight of his decisions. Paul had been promised a life of luxury, but all he had gotten was the burden of taking another man's life. In a drunken stupor, Paul Gall confessed to a friend about the murder. His shame and guilt had overwhelmed him, and he had to get it off his chest. The friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately contacted the police. Paul's confession to his friend was the break the investigation needed. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and the police were about to unravel the true horror of what had happened. With Paul's confession in hand, detectives went back to Mary Ellen. They had the evidence, the motive, and the means. Now, it was time to confront her. But Mary Ellen wasn't prepared for what was about to unfold. As the police closed in, she still tried to play the role of the grieving widow, using her charm and manipulation to evade responsibility. At the police station, Mary Ellen was interrogated once again. But this time, the detectives weren't buying her performance. They had her figured out. Mary Ellen tried to maintain her innocence, insisting that she had nothing to do with her husband's death, but the evidence told a different story. The phone records, the trail of lies, and the confession from Paul Gall were all pointing directly to her. Her acting could no longer save her. The detectives laid out the facts, piece by piece, but Mary Ellen stuck to her story. She tried to justify her actions, claiming she had been a victim of circumstances, manipulated by the men around her. But no matter how she spun her story, the truth was clear: she had orchestrated Bob's death for money, and her actions had been calculated and cold-hearted. As Mary Ellen's trial began, the world watched with bated breath. The woman who had once been a symbol of Hollywood glamour was now the center of a true crime drama that shocked even the most seasoned detectives. The prosecution presented their case with damning evidence, showing how Mary Ellen had used her charm to manipulate Jimmy Bernstein, Paul Gall, and even her own daughter. The defense, on the other hand, tried to paint Mary Ellen as a victim, someone who had been caught in a web of manipulation and abuse. They argued that she had been driven to desperate measures, but the jury wasn't convinced. As the case unfolded, it became clear that Mary Ellen's life of deception was finally catching up to her. The media followed the trial closely, with reporters and photographers capturing every moment. The woman they had once considered a glamorous Hollywood figure was now a symbol of betrayal, manipulation, and murder. As the story unfolded, people around the world began to question how someone like Mary Ellen could have gone so far in her pursuit of wealth and power. Her picture, taken during her trip to Cancun, had gone viral, and the media had dubbed her the Green Widow, a nickname that would stick for the rest of her life. It wasn't just her actions that had caught the public's attention, it was the cold, calculating way in which she had gone about getting what she wanted. As the courtroom drama reached its peak, the tension was palpable. Mary Ellen's life, which she had so carefully crafted, was beginning to crumble before her eyes. The prosecution's case against her was tightening, and the once untouchable widow found herself facing the consequences of her actions. But as the final day of the trial approached, the question remained, would she be able to talk her way out of this, or had her web of lies finally caught up to her? The biggest twist of all came when Nicole Samuelson, Mary Ellen's daughter, was called to testify. The young woman, who had been manipulated by her mother throughout the entire ordeal, found herself in a position she never expected. For years, she had been a willing participant in her mother's schemes, but now, standing before the court, she was forced to confront the truth. Nicole took the stand, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and regret. She had been just a teenager when her mother had pulled her into the world of lies, deceit, and ultimately murder. She had seen her mother's manipulations firsthand, but at the time, she didn't fully understand the extent of what was happening. As Nicole spoke about the events leading up to Bob Samuelson's death, her voice trembled with emotion. She described how her mother had manipulated Jimmy Bernstein into believing that Bob was an abusive husband, how she had tricked him into doing her bidding. But when asked directly if her mother had been involved in the murder, Nicole hesitated. The courtroom fell silent as Nicole's testimony took an unexpected turn. With a heavy heart, she finally admitted that she had been a part of the plan to kill Bob Samuelson. She revealed how her mother had orchestrated the entire thing, how she had made Jimmy believe that Bob was the villain, and how she had convinced Paul Gall to help her. The prosecution used Nicole's testimony to paint a chilling portrait of a mother willing to sacrifice anyone, even her own daughter, in her quest for wealth and power. Mary Ellen's facade of the grieving widow crumbled as the truth was laid bare for everyone to see. Just when it seemed like Mary Ellen's fate was sealed, a shocking twist emerged. The prosecution had presented a mountain of evidence, but one crucial piece was missing, the key to Mary Ellen's ultimate guilt. During the investigation, the police had recovered several items from the crime scene, including Bob's personal effects, but they had overlooked one thing, a set of keys that had been left behind at the Samuelson house. The keys didn't appear to be important at first, but upon further investigation, they were discovered to belong to a safe in the garage. Inside the safe, police found something that changed everything, a set of documents that revealed the extent of Mary Ellen's financial troubles. Among the papers was a life insurance policy on Bob Samuelson, one that she had forged and altered after his death. It was a damning piece of evidence, and it was clear now that Mary Ellen had planned Bob's death not just for the money, but to escape the life she had come to resent. She had made sure that everything was in place, from the fake robbery to the life insurance policy, all to secure her future. The defense team was caught off guard by this new revelation. They had no explanation for the documents, and the jury was left with little doubt about Mary Ellen's intentions. Her lies, her manipulation, and her calculated actions were now fully exposed. With all the evidence presented, it was time for the jury to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was thick as they filed out to discuss the fate of Mary Ellen Samuelson. For weeks, they had heard her lies, her manipulations, and her attempts to play the victim, but now they had the truth. As the jury deliberated, the media's attention on the trial only intensified. The Green Widow was a sensation, her every move scrutinized by the public. But as the jurors sat in their room, there was no glamour, no Hollywood shine to distract them from the facts. This was a case of cold-blooded murder, and they had to decide if Mary Ellen would be held accountable. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom, their faces grim but resolute. The judge asked for the verdict, and the courtroom fell silent in anticipation. When the jury announced their decision, the words hung in the air like a thunderclap, guilty of first-degree murder. Mary Ellen's eyes widened in shock. She had tried every trick in the book, manipulation, deceit, and even pretending to be the innocent widow. But in the end, the truth had caught up to her. The jury had seen through her lies, and justice had been served for Bob Samuelson, the man who had loved her unconditionally, only to be betrayed by the woman he had once called his wife. The sentence was handed down swiftly. Mary Ellen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her dreams of living a glamorous life in the spotlight were shattered, and the once beautiful widow was now a convicted murderer. As the years passed, Mary Ellen's name became synonymous with betrayal, manipulation, and greed. The media continued to cover her story, fascinated by how someone who had once seemed so untouchable could fall so far. But for those who had been touched by her lies, the story was far from over. Nicole, her daughter, moved on with her life, but the scars of her past would never truly heal. She had been a victim of her mother's manipulations, and while she had testified against her, the weight of the guilt still lingered. Nicole never spoke publicly about her mother again, choosing instead to live a quiet life, far from the chaos that had defined her childhood. For Bob Samuelson, the man who had worked so hard to build a life and a career, the story ended tragically. He had been a good man, a loving husband, and a devoted father. But in the end, his dreams were stolen by the woman he had trusted most. His death became a grim reminder that even in Hollywood, where dreams are made, there are dark shadows lurking beneath the surface. As for Mary Ellen, her tale became a cautionary one. She had chased a life of luxury and fame, but in the process, she had lost everything that truly mattered. The woman who had once been admired for her beauty and charm was now a symbol of deceit and murder. And in the end, the life she had longed for remained as elusive as ever. This is just the beginning of our deep dive into the world of crime and betrayal. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more gripping stories that will leave you questioning the darkness that lies beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives.